and welcome, friends, to our 11 a.m. Sunday morning meeting. This lodge, as well as many others, meet on Sundays for the regeneration of our universe, as well as humanity and all that lives and breathes on it. The wisdom of the ages is always available and present, and those who are ready find it. It is under karma and reincarnation that this progression occurs, and cycles is an integral part of it. Without karma and reincarnation, men's ultimate aim, which is perfection, cannot be reached. So, in cyclic order, all of the nations that were in the past present on earth keep coming back. It is necessary to understand this progression because cycles are not just periods of time, but its implications are tremendous in the sense that all of the knowledge gained by humanity in repeated periods come back to earth, plus what we have gained in between those times. To this end, then, the 19th century effort of the philosophical tenets of Theosophy was brought into the world. This philosophy is a very moral and ethical philosophy in the sense that it considers humanity as a brotherhood, as a complete unit among themselves, in the sense that each other is part of one another. That brings about a universe of justice under the law of karma, and this progression then occurs under law. Today's reading comes from the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna states, "Even though myself unborn, of changeless essence, and the Lord of all existence, yet in presiding over nature which is mine, I am born but through my own maya, the mystic power of self-ideation, the eternal thought in the eternal mind. I produce myself among creatures of son of Bharata whenever there is a decline of virtue and an insurrection of vice and injustice in the world. And thus I incarnate from age to age for the preservation of the just, the destruction of the wicked, and the establishment of righteousness. Whoever of Arjuna knoweth my divine birth and actions to be even so, doth not upon quitting his mortal frame enter into another, for he entereth into me. Many who were free from craving, fear, and anger, filled with my spirit, and who depended upon me, having been purified by the ascetic fire of knowledge, have entered into my being. In whatever way men approach me, in that way do I assist them. But whatever the path taken by mankind, that path is mine, O son of Treata. Those who wish for success to their works in this life sacrifice to the gods, and in this world success from their action soon cometh to pass." And now today's talk, cycles.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, friends. Today's talk is about cycles, and we're going to look at cycles in a couple of different ways. But just briefly to define a cycle, it comes from the Greek word kuklos, and then in English it became cycle. And it means a ring, but if we look at this sort of sideways, like this, it completes itself. But when we're talking about cycles in the theosophical realm, we're talking about something that repeats, as in, it comes back to itself and then it repeats, but more like a screw thread, where it's a spiral. Because every time the end of a cycle comes and a new one begins, all the beings have acquired some new intelligence and experience, so everything proceeds from a different place in the sense that's a little bit higher cycle, having gained that experience and knowledge. Oh, in Sanskrit, there's a similar word, and kalpa is it, and that means a cycle of a very, very large time period. And we will talk about time periods. But basically, cycles prevail everywhere and in everything. Not only in our day, like from dawn till dusk, it repeats, but even within the day. Even expanding it out within a month, within a year. And all these cycles are not arbitrary, they're based on facts in nature, because cycles is a law that prevails everywhere and in everything. So we know the moon goes around the earth, and that gives us a monthly cycle of approximately 28 days. And the earth goes around the sun, and that gives us a year of about 365 days. But we have to remember that our sun is cycling around its center, which astronomers have made projections, but no one knows exactly, except Theosophy, the wisdom of the ages, says the central spiritual sun is what our sun revolves around. And it takes approximately 25,800 years to proceed through that cycle, and that's called a sidereal cycle, and that's when the sun goes through every sign of the zodiac, the 12 signs. So there are enormous cycles, and there are cycles within cycles. There are cycles within our bodies, like the length of time a cell lives and another takes its place. There's the cycle of respiration. There's the cycle of the flow of blood through the body. There's just so many cycles. They're ubiquitous. And this is evident to everyone. But in terms of the theosophical wisdom, there are some interesting things that we can take note of that will help us understand these laws. Theosophy postulates that the universe, says that the universe comes into being and through a period of manifestation, and spirit involutes into matter, and then through a cycle it evolves and a gradual return to spirit. So these grand cycles, these cycles of the universe manifesting has been called the Great Breath and Brahma. The Hindus have calculated his day, his year, his life, and it never ends. These end up being enormous periods of time. It's very difficult for us to comprehend. In an article called Cycles by William Q. Judge, he says, he's quoting from the Gita. No, this is not from the Gita, but he is quoting, it might be from the Wisdom of the Egyptians by Synesius. At the approach of Brahma's day, which ends after 1,000 ages, all manifested objects come forth from the non-developed principle. At the approach of Brahma's night, they are absorbed into the original principle. This collective mass of existing things, thus coming forth out of the absolute again and again, is dissolved. At at the approach of that night. And at the approach of a new day, it emanates again spontaneously. So there's all these cycles. What are we to make of them? Well, there's some basic figures that HPV reveals in the Secret Doctrine that will help us understand some of these immense periods of time. And she says that it's called a manvantara, which we've probably all heard of. And I'll put up some figures, and then we're going to switch a little bit to a cycle of descent of spiritual beings. So she starts off first with saying the solar year. And if we were to take the solar year in half, approximately 182 days, and use this analogy in terms of understanding these super cycles, she says, take as a first comparison and a help towards a more correct conception the solar year. And as a second, the two halves of that year, each producing a day and a night of 6 months each. That happens at the North Pole. Now imagine, if you can, instead of a solar year of 365 days, eternity. Let the sun represent the universe and the polar days and nights of 6 months each, days and nights lasting 182 trillions and quadrillions of years instead of 182 days each. As the sun rises every morning on our objective horizon, so does the universe emerge periodically on the plane of objectivity, issuing from that subjectivity. This is the cycle of life, and as the sun disappears from our horizon, so does the universe disappear at regular periods when the universal night sets in. And this is about the best idea we can get of it, because it's really difficult for the human mind to conceive of these large periods of time. No human brain can truly grasp 182 trillions of years, much less quadrillions, or even a million. But if we can make an approximation to the idea by using her suggestion of dividing the year and calling them 6 months a day and 6 months a night, and extending that into what is equivalent to infinity with us, then it helps us sort of grasp. In Isis Unveiled, she gives the Indian figures of ages, or yugas, embracing untold number of periods that we could look back into the antediluvian ages. And she says their system comprises of a kalpa, or a grand period, of 4,320 billion. And of this, this is a maha kalpa. No, this is a kalpa, and it consists of 4,320 billion years, and we can divide this into the 4 ages. The golden age, satya, and the silver age, the bronze age, and the iron age. And it said the satya age, or yuga, as she's written in the Isis, is 728. Just keep this with me. And this becomes important because there's some symbolism hidden within these, and it serves to show us that examining her writings very carefully will lead us to clues philosophy that we might not get if we just skim it over. So this added together, it doesn't equal this, it's 4,320 millions, 4 billion. I'll write that down, 4 billion. And that's 4 million. Sorry, I get confused looking at all these numbers. So this makes one divine age, or a maha yuga. And to get an idea is that 71 of these, 71 maha yugas is 306,72000. And she says you have to add to it a twilight and a dawn. And she comes up with more numbers. And it ends up making a manvantara of, and this is without the dawns, twilights. She says, and then you have to add the dawn or the twilight, which is equal to this, and making a kalpa, or a grand period, of this number. And I know I went over it roughly, but I did the math, and if you take 71 times this and 14 times the result for the manvantaras, you do in fact come up with this figure. And it shows us that the secret doctrine is based on these enormous amounts of time. But how does this relate to us? She said, the digits themselves become important and provide clues, because the digits of the Satya Yuga, 1728, added together make 18. These added together make 18. These added together make 18. So these aren't arbitrary. These come up to 9, but if you take the 18, the 1 and the 8 does equal 9. And there's a peculiar property that 9 as the symbology of the digit, if we could sort of imagine it as having, as all numbers do, an influence, a vibration, a property, is that 9 tends to repeat itself in nature. Like 6 times 3 is 18, 1 and 8 is 9. 7 times, 9 times, if there's a 9 in it, like 9 times 3 is 27, 2 plus 7 equals 9. The 9 tends to repeat itself. And she says that 18 is a particularly spiritual number. It's a peculiar number specifically to Krishna and in the Bhagavad Gita, because the poem has 18 chapters in it. Also, she goes on and on, our judge goes on and on, multiplying just to discover the recurrence of 18s and 9s over and over again. Like, it goes on and on. But basically, this becomes a very key figure, because manipulating these in certain ways comes to the 4, 3, and the 2. And in Isis Unveiled, she cites the fact that the true key to the secret cycle is 432,000 years, and it may have something to do with Kali Yuga, the Iron Age. And what's interesting about that for us is that we are said to be in the Kali Yuga now. And what happens during Kali Yuga is things are precipitate very rapidly. There's a greater chance of opportunity. Beings reincarnate much more quickly. Their lives are shorter. It's sort of speeded up. The average lifetime is much longer. this time period is much longer, and we get the idea that there's an acceleration. And this presents us with certain opportunities. While conditions are difficult during Kali Yuga, she says to liken it to winter, that the sun, the spiritual influence, has been dimmed, yet matter takes precedence, but working through it, if we can keep the idea of spirit within our lives and within this sort of difficult cycle, then the opportunities of creating a golden age, because a golden age comes out of the Iron Age, the idea is that we can help bring it about. What this secret cycle is, Judge says, I am not competent to say. I only desire to throw out the hints. One other thing I wanted to add to it. And these examples follow exactly like the example of a day, as above, so below. We can take that analogy because every day has a dawn and a twilight, just like these do. And so the symbolism goes all the way to, our everyday lives, all the way up to all the periods of manifestation, all our rebirths on this chain of globes. And if one understands all these figures and correlates it with the secret doctrine, where she says that in the rounds and races there is a cycle of the chain of globes, and each being goes around the 7. 6, and this is globe view. So it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and these are on the same plane. And so in terms of going through the Manvantara, each race goes through this 7 times to make a round. And she says, of the rounds that we've gone through, and taking those figures, she said that we're in Kali Yuga of the 28th age of the 7th Manvantara. So this student calculated that the 28th age, meaning that we are 39% completed with that, and the 7th of the 7th Manvantara puts us in having puts us in the 4th round. So if we have to go through this 7 times, and we're in the 4th, we've crossed the halfway point. And in terms of spirit involuting into matter and matter evolving out, we've passed the halfway point. So spirit is gradually becoming in ascendancy, matter, but it's up to each person, and it's up to those who have this knowledge to actually help this cycle along through self-induced and self-devised efforts. This is just sort of like mathematics, but it serves to illustrate that we are in a key point in our evolution, and it's up to all of us to help bring that to bear for all beings. Now, the way it bears, and it sounds like we're sort of left alone to go through this massive cycle on and on and on. How is the average person to know this? Or it just seems so immense. It seems so abstract. But in this article of Cycles, Mr. Judge quotes The Wisdom of the Egyptians by Synesius, and says that relates to the Egyptians' take on this. And Osiris, he represents good, light, spirit. And there are parallels. There is Osiris and Typhus. Whoops, and there's Krishna and his sort of Krishna and Kansa, Rama and Ravana. In other words, these parallels can be drawn from every tradition. And what's important about it is that this is the good side of nature, what we would call good or spiritual, and this is what we would call evil or the opposer, is that they always appear together, because in manifestation, spirit and matter cannot be separated. They're one and the same, so they both appear at the same time. So there's a struggle going on over grand cycles, but also within the life of each person. And it's up to us, as was said, to help ourselves and all of humanity through these cycles in the sort of play of existence towards the light, towards spirit. So from this Wisdom of the Egyptians, it says that Osiris was initiated by his father into the royal mysteries. The gods informed him that a strong and envious, malignant force was present with Typhus, the opposer, to whom he was allied and by whom he was hurled forth into light, in order that they might employ him as an instrument of evil which they inflict on mankind. For the calamities of nations are the banquets of the evil demons, or daemons. You must not think that the gods are without employment, or that their descent to this earth is perpetual, for they descend according to orderly periods of time, for the purpose of imparting a beneficent impulse in the republic of mankind. And as was said in the reading of the Gita, Krishna says, I incarnate when there is an insurrection of vice in the world to reestablish harmony. And this parallels that. The Egyptian system parallels that. This happens when they harmonize a kingdom and send to this earth for that purpose souls who are allied to themselves. For this providence is divine and most ample, which frequently through one man pays attention to and affects countless multitudes of men. So in other words, this struggle between spirit and matter, going on within ourselves, going on within our life, going on within the age, that there is that part of us that, the animal part of us that is drawn to the material side, but there is that godlike part of us who we truly are, who is aspiring to this, to the light, to spirit. And it seems that we are not alone to fight this struggle, that there are beings who have completed the cycles that we're going through and have perfected themselves, the adepts, the Mahatmas. And sometimes when people first hear this, they think, well, why aren't they, the world's a mess, why aren't they here, why aren't they fixing things? And it's because cycles and karma are laws of the universe, and they can't interfere with karma, but they can inject a harmonizing influence when the time, when the cycle is ripe, and through individuals also. So, to continue, there is in the terrestrial abode the sacred tribe of heroes who pay attention to mankind and who are able to give them assistance even in the smallest concerns. This heroic tribe, as it were, a colony from the gods, established here in order that this terrene abode may not be left destitute of a better nature. But when matter excites her own proper blossoms to war against the soul, the resistance made by these heroic tribes is small when the gods are absent, for everything is strong only in its appropriate time and place. But when the harmony adapted in the beginning by the gods to all the terrene things becomes old, they descend again to earth that they may call the harmony forth, energize and resuscitate it when it is, as it were, expiring. When, however, the whole order of mundane things, greatest and least, is corrupted, then it is necessary that the gods should descend for the purpose of imparting another orderly distribution of things. So we get the idea that though as individuals we're working through this cycle, it's not that humanity, that there's no hope. There is these beings who are influencing the cycles of civilizations, of centuries, of decades, of small periods and grand periods, in order to help humanity, because they have pledged themselves, understanding that we're all one, we all come from the same source, that it would be difficult for us to accomplish this without their aid. So there are those beings who make the sacrifice to stay behind to help humanity and to inject these ideas at the right time. And HPB was one of these beings. She brought the wisdom from the East to the West to inject these ideas into the culture, into the society, so that it could mature over time and individuals could use this towards helping each other. This cycle, Judge says, for the present purpose may be called the cycle of descending celestial influences. And by descending, he means descending upon us. The appearance of Typhos at the same time of Osiris is paralleled in the history of Krishna and Kansa, and with Rama and Ravana. The gods foresaw, after instructing Osiris after his initiation, the gods foresaw two questions that might arise within him, and which also come before us in thinking about this. The first is the idea that if the gods are alive and do not mingle with men to the advantage of men, and for the purpose of guiding them, then they must necessarily be without work. They're just in the spiritual plane. But such a charge has been made against the beings who are said to live in the Himalayas, possessed of infinite knowledge and power. But as we just said, this is not true, but this question occurs and it should be addressed. Because many in the public say, if such beings know so much, why don't they come amongst us? And if not, what are they doing? And it's answered that these beings, we could call them gods, adepts, or whatever, have governed mankind through efficient causes, proceeding downwards by various degrees. The gods being perpetually concerned in their proper sphere with those things relating to them, and which in their turn moved other causes that produced appropriate effects on the earth, and themselves only coming directly into earthly relations when that became necessary at those certain orderly periods of time, upon the disappearance of harmony, which would soon be followed by destruction if not restored. Then the gods themselves descend. This is after the revolution of many smaller cycles, and this is what is in the Bhagavad Gita, when a being like Krishna actually incarnates on the earth, or like Buddha incarnates on the earth amongst men in a body to enact and to show the archetype of the type of spiritual wisdom that is necessary, and in an instructive way. So they come to impart a beneficent impulse in the republic of mankind. And, as was said, sometimes they do it, but the other way they said was through efficient causes. And this is an interesting term. Like, what do we mean by efficient causes? In other words, Judge seems to be saying in this article that this can be done with less power than would be dissipated were a celestial being to descend upon the earth. And here the doctrine of the influence among us of Nirmanakayas, supported, in the voice by that footnote. Nirmanakayas are those who have perfected themselves but stay behind to help humanity. And these are the heroes spoken of in every tradition, the heroes who, make the epic battle and save mankind and such. Those heroes are none other than the Nirmanakayas, the adepts of this or previous manvantras, those huge cycles, who remain here in various states or conditions. Some are not using bodies at all, but keep spiritually alive among men in all parts of the world. And that would be maybe an example of efficient causes. And others who are actually using bodies in the world. Who the latter are, it would, of course, be impossible for me to know, and if I had the information, to give it out would not be appropriate. So this descent, or even ascent, it said, of celestial beings upon the earth, or progressed souls, happens according to cyclic law and proceeds regularly and orderly. In other words, everything is coordinated on some way by type, there's an order to it, and this suggests to us, well, what is this order in the universe that Theosophy can help shed some light on? And why? For the purposes of imparting a beneficent impulse to humanity. They harmonize a kingdom and send to earth souls who are allied to them. This providence is divine and ample, and through one man pays attention to and affects countless others, as was said. So, if we look for evidence in the historical record, and Theosophy points to many examples of beings doing this, herself one, we can see that there is a larger scheme going on, and that we can help take part in bringing about the golden age by working through, by holding firm to principles and working through this dark age, this winter where in Kali Yuga, when the sun is dim, so to speak. So, to finish up, these heroes are the Nirmanakayas. And to sum up, she said, among this sacred tribe of heroes, there's beings of all levels. It forms a chain from the gods all the way down to those who have more spiritual knowledge but aren't perfected, and those who have a little less, but it works its way all the way down to mankind. And she says there are those who, although now inhabiting bodies and moving among men, actually Judge is saying this, have passed through many occult initiations in previous lives, but are now condemned, as it were, to the penance of living in circumstances and in bodies that hem them in, as well as for a time make them forget the glorious past. But their influence is always felt, even if they themselves are not aware of it. For their higher nature, being in fact more developed than that of other men, it influences other natures at night or in hours of the day when all is favorable. The fact that these obscured adepts are not aware now of what they really are only has to do with their memory of the past. It does not follow because a man cannot remember his initiations that he has had none. But there are some cases in which we can judge with a certain degree of certainty that such adepts were incarnated and what they were named. Take Thomas Vaughan, Raymond Lully, Sir Thomas More, Jakob Burma, Paracelsus, and others like them. These souls were as witnesses to the truth, leaving through the centuries in their own nations evidences for those who followed, and suggestions for keeping spirituality bright, seed thoughts, as it were, ready for the new mental soil. And as well as these historical characters, there are countless numbers of men and women now living who have passed through certain initiations during their past lives on earth, and who produce effects in many directions, quite unknown to themselves now. They are, in fact, friends of the sacred tribe of heroes, and can therefore be more easily used for spreading of influences and the carrying out of effects necessary for the preservation of spirituality in this age of darkness. We find in our present experience a parallel to this forgetting of previous initiations. There is hardly one of us who has not passed through circumstances in early life, all of which we have forgotten, but which ever since sensibly affect our thoughts and life. Hence, the only point about which any question can be raised is that of reincarnation. If we believe in that doctrine, there is no great difficulty in admitting that many of us have been initiated to some extent and forgotten it for the time. In connection with this, we find in the second volume of the Secret Doctrine, some suggestive words. Now that which the student of occultism ought to know is that the third eye is indissolubly connected with karma. In the case of the Atlanteans, it was precisely the spiritual being which made errors, and the spirit element being still the master principle in man in those days. Thus, it is in those days that the heaviest karma of the fifth race was generated. Hence the assertion that many of us are now working off the effects of these evil karmic influences produced by us in Atlantean bodies. So it goes on to say that we can't just keep this life in perspective. We have to realize that we have lived many times before and have accumulated karma. And difficult experiences that we're going through now are the results. And if we cannot be held back by them, but put them in their proper respect and say, these things are happening for a reason, that they are the effects of karma that I myself have produced, but in addition to sort of enduring them and repaying the debt that I incurred, I also want to look towards the good, towards the sacred tribe, and nourishing that idea, those seed ideas like given in the Gita and the voice, will help one to be a friend of the sacred tribe of those beings and help bring about the golden age, which will come from the Iron Age, Kali Yuga. And if we remember, Kali Yuga lasts 432,000 years, And HPV said around her lifetime, since the death of Krishna, that 5,000 years have passed. We still have a ways to go, but knowing this can help one stay strong in the face of difficulties and things we all have to go through. So with that, we'll end it and open it up to questions. There's lots more, but shall stop there for the moment.
I'm sorry. So we advance through cycles. Is that a given?
Mm-hmm. They're a part of us, really. We can't be separate. It's not like we're this thing tumbling around. We're part of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of us. They can't really separate them.
Okay. Because I could actually see that in like some of the things that I do. Most of the things that I do, they're in patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I do it is because it keeps my memory strong. Like sometimes with my kids, it advances my kids at a much faster rate. So if they're not moving fast enough, I just add on to, like, we'll do a session, and within the session we'll do another period of training, and I just keep going over and over and over again until they, advance much faster than they, because sometimes they don't move. I don't see a lot of movement, so I started adding more patterns, more, to get them ahead. But in my private life, I do a lot of, I develop rituals and different things like that I constantly, like every 3 days, once a week, things like that I know that it's going to keep me on my toes and keep me focused.
That's a great example of using cycles to their advantage, efficient causes. Instead of just reacting to the things that happen, taking the initiative and setting up a new cause. And this time of year, as we approach the winter solstice, when the year renews itself, that would be a good time. That's why there's New Year's resolutions, to take advantage of the cycle, because the earth, the astral light, it said everything is renewing. So that's a good time to make a strong impression to carry one through the year. And it sounds like you've already intuited it, that you're using cycles to strengthen the things you want to see, the positive. That's great.
So, instead of just thinking, we're talking about an ever-evolving process. Thinking about the Theosophy, which is often called which is really the science of life and the art of living. You talked a lot about the science of life and a lot about the other two. But what I'm getting out of this is even this immense period of time is just a snippet. It just goes on. We are ever-evolving beings, and we are on this physical plane right now, but there are other planes of existence. So this is just a little snapshot, if we want to take it, of our opportunities and our challenges.
An excellent summary. Thank you.
Wow. I was trying to formulate a question, but in all that, the question went. So the idea is that we right now in these bodies think we are those bodies. That's typically what we're thinking, but we are not those bodies at all. Those bodies are our vehicles. I don't know.
And we're passing through these set of experiences that we've created, but it's not the end-all be-all. It's part of a greater evolution. It's part of a greater scheme, and we are destined for really, truly great things. And holding on to that seed idea, not getting caught up in, you know, all the details of this life, helps us through it, not to be so attached to, you know, this body as me, this personality as me, but it's hard to remember it because the material world and our circumstances can be so compelling.
Absolutely. So we are there. Actually have this opportunity to advance. We are in this age of Kali Yuga now, but we are making that age, if you will, and we can get ourselves out of this, humanity, individually and nationally and so forth efforts.
Yeah, the article even addressed that not all beings are in Kali Yuga at the same time. Like when Europe was in the Dark Ages, spirituality and learning was alive in the Arab and Indian world. They weren't in such a dark cycle like Europe was. So there are like variations. But in general, you summed it up perfectly, is to realize we're part of the cycle, and we can indeed make an impression that will be there for those who come after us. Not just about helping ourselves, but by helping those who come behind us or those who we're with in life. And what's interesting about all the figures, and the student didn't elaborate it as well as I'd hoped, but they give clues. Blavatsky said there's these characteristics, and you can see a repeating pattern. You can see a cycle just within the numbers that are used, just within the digits. So it's sort of pregnant with possibilities for those who want to study it further.
You mentioned also the well, one thing that we're sort of at the bottom of this age of materialism in this plane of being, if you will. So that's something to remember too when we're out in the world. I think dealing with the world as it is now, this age of materialism, that we're sort of bottomed out now and we're headed back towards spirituality. And you mentioned also the Atlanteans, which it said we are Atlanteans, and they were highly spiritual, you said. So, you know, there's a cycle that goes on, and we take advantage of uplifting things or pulling it down. As Atlanteans, we pulled it down. So we have this opportunity to, once we get to that level of spirituality again, to do something better with it, would you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess with that, we'll end if there's no further questions or comments. Next week is December 6th, Karma. And then Cyclic Return and Evolution on the 13th. You can find our website at ultdc.org on the web. Thank you so much.